Right, so I really struggled to write this talk. I am just about to finish my PhD, and there's a really specific kind of panic that sets in just about a month before you're supposed to submit that has something to do with this impending deadline you may or may not make, but also perhaps it's more about this great unknown of afterwards, which is kind of be summed up in one word, which is unemployment. So I really saw the idea for doing this talk. I wanted to potentially use it as an opportunity to impress future employers. And I wrote a talk and I started to practice it, but then I realized that something was really missing. And I realized that what was missing from it was my own personal story and the whole reason that I wanted to talk about what I'm going to talk about tonight in the first place. So tonight I'm going to talk about impact, and I'm going to talk about the way that we as a culture conceptualize, the way we think about impact, and I'm going to argue that we need to change that way. I'm coming at this from the perspective in part, of an academic who's been working for 4 years at looking at the impacts of scientific research in the Bolivian Amazon, so looking at what local people think about scientific research, the impacts on them. But also for me, it's a really personal issue. For as long as I can remember, I felt like it was my kind of role in life to go out and impact the world, to have an impact on society. I can still remember when I was a child, the first time someone ever introduced me to the idea of poverty as a concept. And when you're a child and you've never wanted for anything, and someone tells you that, well, there's some people that have almost nothing, and other people that have lots of stuff, it doesn't make any sense, because when we're children, we're taught the values of sharing and fairness. And so that stuck with me. And then as I got older and was a teenager and a young adult, and learned about other issues of social injustice and environmental problems in our world, I felt like I had to go out and do something about it. So after I finished university, I decided to move to Mexico. I was really interested in looking at the impacts of the foreign policies of my government from the United States on Latin America. And so I went there with all this enthusiasm and energy and good intentions to have some kind of impact. And I worked with a lot of different organizations, I did many different things, but nothing ever really seemed to work. Like, nothing really seemed to achieve the impact that I had hoped it would. So I thought, well, I need to go back to school, I need to learn more. So I went and I decided to do a master's degree in international development. And I wrote this grant that I got funded to go to Nicaragua. And I heard this grant, I remember, had this really amazing title. It was something like Bridging Local Peoples and Scientific Knowledge for a Transition to Sustainability. So I got like all the buzzwords in there, right? And I got funded. And let's just leave aside for one moment the fact that I'd never been to Nicaragua before, and I had absolutely no idea what the local knowledges I was supposed to be integrating were. So I arrived to Nicaragua in this community, and very quickly, within the first week, I realized that all my assumptions were completely wrong, and all my ideas could be thrown out the window. And I had this real kind of crisis of meaning and of purpose. Like, I'm here to have an impact. I'm here to do research with an impact. I'm not making any sense. Like, what's my purpose here? Why am I in Nicaragua? Why am I in Latin America? And so as I was suffering this crisis of meaning, I was lucky enough to be living with this really wonderful, wonderful family that was mostly made up of strong, very intelligent women. And in this family was the grandmother named Maria. And Maria would often sit, she was very frail and she couldn't really leave the house, so she would sit on the porch and spend her days there. And because when you're in the midst of a crisis of meaning, you have a lot of downtime because you don't really know what to do with yourself. I spent a lot of time just sitting with Maria. And Maria and I would talk, and she would mainly tell me about stories from her own life, which was a really difficult life of a lot of poverty, and suffering. She had suffered domestic abuse. She had lost a lot of children. And we really came to really love one another. And I think Maria and we were a real comfort to one another at that time. And the reason I tell this story is because I think this was the moment, these conversations with Maria, for me, were when I started to really change personally and professionally. Because I started to realize that I had come in with these assumptions that were based on something that wasn't really the point. And they were also based on a privilege, a very specific privilege that I was able to buy a plane ticket and go to a place thinking I was going to go have impact there. And I think this kind of impact comes from the way we look at impact in our culture. If you Google impact, this is one of the first images you'll find. This idea of something being hard-hitting, intense, massive, one way, where there's an impact door and an impactee. And when I was in my early 20s, when I was in Latin America, I was thinking, I have to be this impactor, I have to come up with these, I have to figure out what the problems are, come up with solutions, I have to impact things, make a difference. But I think this is a way that scientists, we often think of it as well, that we're the experts and community development workers. We think we have to go out and do things. But I think that we can think of impact in a different way. I think we can think about as a kind of connection. So in this picture, this is from my more recent research, this is a picture taken by Marcos, who's a park guard. And it shows scientists and park guards helping one another. And this, to me, represents a kind of impact that's based on connection. It's based on relationships. It's based on ideas of collaboration, trust, kind of long-term, many conversations. Also very small moments made up of helping someone out in a moment of crisis, or being the godparent for someone when they have a baptism, or even singing karaoke at a bar. But it's many different moments, and it's two-way. And I think the problem is, in our society, it's individuals that get attention. It's lone voices that have a stage, like here. It's big ideas that get funded. I got funded quite a lot of money a couple of times by writing grants to go do research in places that I'd never been to before I wrote the grants. And this, for me, this represents a kind of power that is not deserved. And it's a power that's based on really disturbing legacies of colonialism, of imperialism, of slavery, and of separate but equal policies that are anything but equal. And so my research in Nicaragua did not achieve a transition to sustainability. But luckily for me, I learned a great deal when I was there. It's a long-term process, and I'm still very much in the midst of it. It's about learning from your mistakes. It's about realizing that maybe you're not going to get it right the first time, but if you keep talking to people, if you keep trying, you can find ways. And so I think it's about just listening and being present and going with your ears and your eyes open. And so what I want to leave you with is this. I think impact is something that we can't do alone. We can't do it from behind closed office doors, sitting at desks, writing projected outcomes or expected products of what impact we're going to achieve. We have to go out into the world, and we have to have our eyes and our ears open, and we have to be willing to be impacted first. And only then, only when we realize that impact is two-way, then we have the potential to have a real impact. Thank you.